This is an introduction to Taoist alchemy, offering an overview of key principles by discussing a rather advanced cultivation practice, the Greater Mandala of Heaven, which builds on the Lesser Mandala of Heaven we explored in the previous video. Ambitious? Maybe. While no lecture can substitute for actual practice, because that's what it's gonna take for you to figure out what the Greater Mandala of Heaven even is for you, I want to at least give you a powerful visual and overview of the practice.
When we say alchemy, what exactly do we mean? Well, here are the core elements. 1. Alchemy is the transformation of substances for the refinement of nature. It's process-oriented, phases of procedural change that purify and perfect matter, endeavoring to align substance with spirit. 2. Transformation occurs through harmonizing of the opposites, premised on an implicit dualism in nature and a reconciliation of that polarizing nature. Alchemy strives for the sacred union, the alchemical marriage. And 3, we document alchemical processes through the use of symbolic language and imagery, premised on a particularized cosmological framework.
We are acknowledging this notion that your physical body, substance, is finite and limited, and so the only way to go beyond those constraints is to transcend that physical body and become fully spiritual. Alchemy is that transformation of substances, and Taoist alchemy seeks transformation of the finite and limited into the infinite and unlimited, or matter to spirit.
Taoist alchemy divides into outer alchemy, 外丹, and inner alchemy, 内丹. Outer alchemy works with physical substances to create elixirs aimed at healing, longevity, prosperity, or immortality. It's a proto-scientific practice of refining materials using metals, minerals, herbs, and tools like crucibles or cauldrons. Inner alchemy is a spiritual discipline of creating figurative elixirs from the body's subtle energies. You treat Jing, Qi, and Shen as ingredients refined through breathwork, movement, and focused meditation. Outer alchemy evolved into traditional Chinese medicine and connects to modern chemistry, metallurgy, and Taoist ritual magic. Inner alchemy lives on in Qigong, meditation, martial arts, Zen practice, and Taoist ritual traditions.
I've covered Taoist cosmology more closely in past videos, but here's a short summary that helps us to set the stage. It's important because all principles in this tradition, all processes, are based on this framework.
Tai, meaning the great unity, the supreme one, is also what we call the Tao. Yin-yang, the yin and yang binary and duality of the Tao, is the Taiji, the supreme ultimate, or the great and the numinous. The binary and innate polarizing duality of yin and yang factor into the 5 changing phases, Wu Xing. I have a whole video course with downloadable free handouts and references dedicated to the 5 changing phases, so we won't go into detail here. Likewise, for the Ba Gua 8 trigrams, which are the fundamental building blocks of the I Ching. For a deep dive of the 8 trigrams, be sure to check out that previous video. The 8 trigrams represent how yin and yang undergo the 5 changing phases to produce 8 states of physical reality and mental states or spiritual conditions. Where we focus in alchemy is on Jing, Qi, Shen, the 3 treasures, which in so many ways mirrors the concept of the tria prima in Western alchemy. There are also Ba Gua, or 8 trigram correspondences to the 3 treasures that are going to be relevant as we further explore Taoist inner alchemy. Note also that Jing corresponds with water in addition to earth, and Shen, spirit, corresponds with fire in addition to heaven and lake. The great purpose of alchemy is to cultivate your essence Jing into vitality Qi, then Qi into divinity or spirit consciousness Shen, then Shen alchemizes into the numinous void Xu, transcendence. So the great purpose of Taoist alchemy is this idea of returning to the source we came from. There was this whole cycle of transformations that led to creating us, and now our whole life purpose is to cycle through alchemical transformations to return to that source Tao.
What I just said about the Taoist Tria Prima is so important, it's worth repeating.
Here's the alchemical process per Taoism in a nutshell, the core phases pictorialized. And we started this conversation in part 1 on the Lesser Mandala in this 2-part video lecture. Jing is nutritive essence. It's the stuff that gives you physical form and as a result determines your lifespan, your physical health, your physical capabilities, and that's inclusive of the ceremonial magician's extent of power.
Let me explain. Intermediate level practitioners might be like, wait a minute, power is fueled by qi, not jing. You are correct, but hear me out. You can't strengthen that qi to the power levels you want without first having that foundational core strength in Jing. So, in ritual magic and basic spellcrafting, for example, that's your herbs, your stones, your ingredients, your materia. The quality of that materia determines how much juice or Jing you have to work with. You're seeking to harness the Jing or nutritive essence of those materials to convert into qi, dynamic vitality. And yes, it's that qi that fuels your power and capacity. But if you don't harness qi from Jing, you're getting that power from somewhere else. Enter advanced alchemy, which is out of scope. Whew, wasn't quite sure how I was going to explain that one. But back to my really impressive PowerPoint that took me hours and hours to make.
Through formulaic alchemical processes, Jing is refined into qi. Qi is dynamic vitality. It's what gives movement and change, transformation, the performance of deeds, and actualization to physical matter. Cultivation of qi then refines it into Shen, and refined Jing nutritive essence is how you prolong the longevity of the body and consciousness. This is the transformation of matter into spirit, and it is as spirit that you are light enough to transcend. These alchemical processes follow the principles of 5 elemental changing phases. That spirit consciousness, which is being within non-being, having form in spite of formlessness, can then return to oneness with Shi, the numinous void. This is the principle of Huandan, return.
We started this lecture noting that alchemy is the transformation of substances for the refinement of nature, and it is process-oriented. That process is premised on the metaphysical significance of numbers. Numbers exist independently of humanity, or at least that's the perspective in Taoist philosophy. And yet at the same time, numbers only hold meaning when defined by their relations. It is through processing numbers, or numerology, that we are able to discover the relation of systems, patterns in the universe, structural forms, and facilitate transformation. It is no coincidence that earlier, when we talked about Taoist cosmology, we were basically counting off numbers.
1 expresses the Tao, the unit circle that is one unit of infinite points and infinite angles, with endlessly repeating rotations, infinite trigonometric cycles. 2 expresses the inherent duality of the Tao, which is a duality that is inherently non-dualistic, yin and yang. 3 is a sacred trinity we can fundamentally talk about as the Tria Prima, Jing Qi Shen, or triple treasure, but it also informs us that inherent in the 2 is the 3. 4 expresses the 4 affinities, a basic principle in the I Ching, which corresponds with the 4 directions, the 4 quadrants, 4 angles that mark space and time. In Taoism, you often hear this expressed by the dragon, tiger, phoenix, and tortoise. 5 expresses the 5 changing phases, the 5 dynamic changes that produce all that is of the Tao. We list these 5 phases as wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. All creation and destruction are governed by these 5. The trinity, or triple treasure, multiplied into the binary form the 6, expressed as the hexagram. When space and time interact to form reality, each aspect of that reality, be that physical or mental, is represented by a hexagram. After 6 is 7, and in Taoism we express this as a sacred 7, namely the 7 gods of the Big Dipper, 7 stars that cycle the northern skies, which arrange and rearrange the hexagrams of the I Ching, or cycle, mandala of changes. 8 expresses the 8 trigrams, each of these 8 primarily driven by one of the 5 changing phases, color-coded on screen, fundamentally encoded by the binary, either yin or yang, represented by the solid and broken lines. And 9 expresses the 9 palaces, or Luoshu magic square, both 9 by itself as a quantity and 9 encompassing 1, 2, 3, 4, all the numbers to 9. 9 represents the schematics of the universe, and then the 9 unlocks the 10 of the mysterious gate.
Xuanguan, translating roughly to mysterious gate, is a term found in esoteric Buddhism and also in Taoist alchemy. The term itself means entrance hall. In Buddhism, it refers to the methodology through which one attains enlightenment or transcendence to a higher realm, the Pure Land, all that jazz. Think of it as a threshold.
Canonical source texts describe the Dazhou Tian in vividly symbolic terms. You have arrived when the mysterious gate, Xuanguan, appears before you. Then harness the circuit that attunes to the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion phoenix, the dark and mysterious tortoise. Then fill the 8 vessels, and by harnessing the complete cycle or mandala of change, the Zhouyi, you move earth above and heaven below to then access the elixir of immortality, Jing. In the previous video, we talked about the 3 dantian, or inner alchemical hubs. Encoded right there in the etymology is the core principle of this alchemical process. The elixir itself, the attainment, is one and the same as the alchemy, the process. So when we say lead into gold, gold being Jing as in Jingdan, it's a purification process of harmonizing disparate aspects into oneness. Gold, the golden elixir, a classical reference to the elixir of immortality. Also, perhaps some of you have heard of the term golden flower and the secret or esoteric alchemical practices for blooming the golden flower.
Quick note. Hua does mean flower in full bloom, but it's also a literary device that means quintessence, something of splendor and magnificence, brilliant, noble, exalted, be that a luminous, ineffable gateway or the blossoming of a flower of golden light. And the more you read into canon, you'll already have read about overflowing springs or vessels, crucibles of radiant elixir. These are just different accounts of the same experience or similar experience of this concept. Now, before we talk about the greater mandala of heaven as the vehicle for learning basic principles of Taoist alchemy, ambitious, yes, let's revisit the lesser mandala of heaven.
The lesser mandala of heaven is an exercise of mindfulness and awareness of a microcosmic orbit occurring within. And if you learn how to control it so it aligns with the macrocosmic universal orbit of nature, your body, mind, and spirit attunes to the universe and in doing so becomes one with it, extending your vitality, longevity, and even mental capacity. First and foremost, you are strengthening your health and wellness. That itself is such an incredible benefit. Even without ever moving on to the greater mandala, you'll see the lasting positive impact on your health. It'll heighten your senses, including your 6th sense, increase your awareness of your surroundings, your awareness of your internal organs. Nevertheless, don't stop there, because when you advance further, this is the foundation of what unlocks your power potential.
Now, I want you to find your calm and center and carefully study the next series of visuals, because I'm going to be showing you what the canonical texts on alchemy have to say about how attainment happens with the greater mandala of heaven, meaning here are the core principles you have to work with. Ready?
Mastery of invoking the 4 directional guardians to safeguard your perimeter marks the beginning of the greater mandala practice. At this stage, the practitioner realizes that the unit circle of the microcosmic orbit corresponds to the Lemniscate, the infinity or figure 8 curve, both expressing the wholeness of cyclical orbit, infinite continuity, and eternal recurrence. In the microcosmic orbit, the focus is attunement and alignment, harmonizing energies. With the figure 8, the focus shifts to transformation. What begins as the unit circle's harmonic rotation expands into the Lemniscate, the symbol of infinite continuity, thus revealing the middle pillar. It is then that the mysterious gate appears, a state often described through various metaphors, one of the most well-known being the golden flower.
For those familiar with traditional Chinese folk dance or martial arts, you'll have come across the significance of the figure 8 movement. This particular energy form is equally important in Taoist alchemy. Now, how did you go from mastery of invoking the four gates or four directional guardians to actualizing the golden flower?
See, to fully harmonize the polarities, you eventually must go beyond the cycling of meridians. The yin-yang symbol hints at a figure 8 pathway in order for the 5 changing phases to unfold into the 8 trigrams. To fully harmonize the duality into one, the pathway is a figure 8, the gradual transformation from yin to yang and then yang to yin until they are indiscernible from one another. That complete consummation is in the form of that figure 8 path inherent in the yin-yang symbol. Such is how you attain mastery of the 9 forms. This here, the He Tu Luo Shu, is the Luo Shu magic square, symbolic of the 9 forms attained through the numerology of the numbers 1, 2, 3, up to 9. Each of the 9 represents a mastery of form in sequence, and then from the completion of 10 back down in sequence, 9, 8, 7, until union or reunion with the 1. And the technique for doing so is pacing the Big Dipper, the 7 stars. Pacing the 7 of the Big Dipper to harness the 9 palaces is how you fill the 8 vessels, the 8 trigrams, trigonometric functions of the unit circle, where algebra connects to geometry to model the mandala. The 9 palaces is a computing device, a processor that the sacred geometer uses in the architecture of the mysterious gate, a threshold you must cross to attain the elixir of immortality. At least as far as Taoist alchemy goes, so much hinges on that sacred 7.
A note about my visuals, or really spirit maps. They leveraged low-frequency rhythmic motion, repetition, symmetry, fluid geometry, and color temperature for psychic regulation, emotional regulation for the skeptical. They're intended to guide your flow, and by helping you to regulate your own flow, these types of visuals bring a sense of contentment. What we've done is heighten the best parts of your thought process and thus facilitate empowerment. You're now in the best state possible to come up with the best ideas possible. Hopefully, ideas on what all this greater mandala of heaven talk means to you. If you're still wondering, okay, but where are your step-by-step instructions on the greater mandala of heaven? I assure you, I've just given them to you. Every diagram, timing of diagram, illustration, and animation was curated with intentionality to communicate critical information and guidance. I've given you the formula. What I admire so much about Taoist alchemy is that it gives us a universal equation, but the values you plug into that formula depends on the specific problem, your particular circumstances unique to you. The solution is on an individual case-by-case basis, dependent on who you are, where you are, how your nature interacts in certain scenarios, and what it is you truly seek.
In this Qing dynasty text, Dao Men Yu Yao, the fundamentals on Taoist alchemy, the lesser mandala is described as a fa. A fa can be taught. It's an established rule, order, or methodology. Not to mention, this alchemy textbook describes performance of the lesser mandala as an operation that is rotational, something run in a cyclical motion. So it reads something to the effect of the cycling turn of the lesser mandala of heaven methodology, whereas the greater mandala of heaven is described as a Gōng. Gōng means achievement, a merit earned through virtuous cultivation. A Gōng is something you have to do on your own. The pictograph is the combination of the word work plus the word strength, effort and fortitude equals Gōng. This character is trickier to translate accurately. It means walking the way, navigating the journey to have to do the thing. You have to do, engage, you have to will with the capital W. And it requires you to make your own calculations and your own assessments. You have to assess on your own.
Nevertheless, the written companion to this video will share how notable alchemists and priests of the past millennia have described the greater mandala of heaven. So hop on over to my site if you are interested in deep diving into this subject. Also, please like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and leave a comment below because that's all I ask for in exchange for these educational videos. It's all I ask.
To close, let's revisit one of the first slides of this lecture outlining the elements of alchemy. Phases of matter, or phases of alchemical change, are expressed as equations of state, quantified by formulas. The pathway from 1 in sequence up to 9, then actualization and return, signified by 10 or 0, form the infinite circle. This is the Taoist alchemical principle of return, 回光返照. In internal alchemy, it starts with attuning to the microcosmic orbit, the lesser mandala. Then you achieve the state of the greater mandala through transformations quantified by the numbered forms. This is how you transform and refine the nature of substances of the myriad beings per Taoist philosophy. The second principle is the heart of alchemy, be that Western or Eastern traditions. Whether you call it yin and yang, heaven and earth, fire, water, sun, moon, king, queen, or sulfur, mercury, it's the union of opposites to produce perfected matter, or matter refined into spirit. It's the transformation of all transformations, process of all processes, formulating the golden elixir. And third, symbolism. Alchemy communicates almost entirely in symbolic language and imagery. The green dragon and red phoenix, metaphors to be approached at multiple levels simultaneously. The I Ching hexagrams are symbols, lines of code, each image holding multiple layers of meaning, meanings contingent on the interpreter. The mysterious gate, the golden elixir, the great medicine, warming and nourishing the inner elixirs, the many names and faces of gods and goddesses.
So, a note on that. In many of these source texts on the Dazhou Tian, Greater Mandala of Heaven, you hear descriptions of invoking divine beings, guardian spirits, deities, and references to inner lords and emperors. You'll read about how the inner dragon must fight the white tiger, and then the dragon and tiger make peace and harmonize in union. Our wise teachers and sages that came before were giving us a really effective tool for facilitating human understanding of otherwise challenging abstract ideas. Assigning a face, form, and story to abstractions help to make these abstractions more accessible to us. So for me, invocation of gods and goddesses is more of a concretization strategy than it is, say, belief in literal sky gods or animal spirits running around going pew pew with their magical powers. Personifying abstract concepts as deity also enables you to have an inner dialogue with these facets of the self that otherwise feel inaccessible. Or getting into the premise of outer alchemy or forms of Taoist folk magic, you personify a mountain, a river, so that you can then engage in dialogue with that mountain or river or the rain. And then it's through this concept of dialogue that you strengthen your psychic connection to nature forms. In magical theory, that's how you are ultimately able to control those nature forms or harness their energies. Oh no, I took too long. It's almost sunset. I have one more section. Just one last section. Let me finish. Ugh. Lately, I've noticed a curious trend. A number of well-known practitioners and scholars of Western folk magic are now saying quite confidently that you cannot use math or science to explain magic, that magic, by its very nature, defies the laws of science. And every time I hear that, I think, that's giving 19th century Eurocentric ethnocentrism. I mean, maybe your magic isn't scientific. See, at the very least, I would argue maybe that's European folk magic, but that's not Taoist alchemy. See, science and how Western thought defines science has historically been weaponized as a cultural boundary marker for European and North American superiority. Carl Jung once wrote that the Chinese never developed what we call science. And in the 19th century, that was a very common belief in Europe that East Asia lacked the empirical method, that Taoist alchemy was metaphysical nonsense, and that traditional Chinese medicine was pseudo-scientific. In the West, knowledge got divided up. Reason versus revelation, but not the same. Science versus the arts, emotions versus logic, facts versus feelings. Intuitive knowing went into one corner, and rational knowing went into the other. Math and science live over here, neat, measurable, objective. Folk magic, mysticism, and alchemy over there, irrational, subjective, primitive, and heaven forbid the two ever meet. But in the East, that line has always been blurred, hence that infinity symbol, the Lemniscate that is a circle, that is the yin-yang symbol. In Taoist thought, intuition and reason are interdependent. It's not that the East didn't have the empirical method. It's that early on, scholars realized not everything that's real can be directly observed. Taoist epistemology anticipates the insight that observation changes the observed and the observed changes the observation. It's not that mysticism and science are incompatible. It's a matter of conceptualizing science or magic as relational empiricism versus reductionist empiricism. Taoist alchemy doesn't reject science. It transcends that division. My approach to folk magic is to consider the rational and the mystical as being one continuum, and your path to gnosis is that figure 8, after realizing it is a circle and the full spectrum of implications of the mandala.